we are live. So I am doing this little Instagram live for my do-it-yourself fitness group. Some members may or may not attend, but I want to make sure it's going to be recorded and anyone can attend live too, any of my Instagram followers as well. But I wanted to go over, some of the stuff that we do in the do-it-yourself fitness group. And essentially it's to know whether or not something's a good protein source is the best place to start. So many people know they need to get more protein. They don't know where to start. Like, what's a good protein source? And we're going to go over a very different way to look at protein, because you can certainly add protein, but something like eggs, sometimes people say, okay, I'll just have more eggs. But if you want to use just eggs as your protein source, you're going to have a ton of fat because they're not super high in protein. But you're going to see the difference in basically the fat content of all your different protein sources. And I'll walk you through that. I'm going to walk you through, other ones that I haven't even written down. There's a full list within the Do-It-Yourself Fitness Group portal. So you can get these after, but I want to walk you through some of these ideas. Now, the main list here, these are just the ones that come to mind. And there's more I wish I could add, but there's only so much room on this whiteboard. So this is the list I have. I'm not even sure you can read it. It probably doesn't even reverse it. God damn. This might not even work as well as I hoped. Can anyone leave a comment? Is this in reverse? Is this mirrored? You probably can't read that. Damn it. Well, that doesn't work too well. Anyways, well, I'll walk you through it as if, it works in the proper order. Man, I was really planning on doing it this way. But, this should say fat balanced. Can anyone leave a comment and let me know if you can read that saying fat balanced? Because that's super important that you can read what I'm writing right now. And if you can't, then I'll just have to talk about it. But essentially, you got your fat balanced proteins. Hey Albert, can you tell me, is this in reverse, or can you read this? Can you read this properly, or is it mirrored? Does it not make sense? Leave a comment if this is in the proper way. Can you read it? But yeah, because otherwise I don't want to really talk to a board that's like backwards. If the writing's backwards, just let me know. So, it's in a, yeah, damn it. Okay. Well, you learn by doing mistakes. That's the lesson. Okay. Essentially, there's three different things there that I wanted to point out. And basically, you have your fat balanced proteins, you have what I call neutral proteins, and you have protein anchors. So when it comes to the different proteins, it's basically knowing the type of fat in it. So a fat balanced protein is going to be, and this is the basis of what's a good protein source, at a minimum having enough protein, is at least 35%, I'd even say 30% protein to 40% protein. Those are the ones I'm going to call fat balanced protein, and there's a reason why I use the term balanced. And then you have neutral proteins, which is anywhere from 40 to 60%. Neutral is not the right term for it, but it's because it's not as heavy as an anchor, you'll understand an anchor, and it's not as bad as a fat balanced. But it's something that you can add some carbs or fats to if you're having it in a meal, but it's more in between. A protein anchor is something that heavily anchors the protein percentage in that meal. Okay, so let's start with the fat balanced ones, because I think you should recognize the things that aren't as dramatically high in protein as you'd think, and how you eat foods with them is really important. So when it comes to like eggs, as I mentioned at the start of this, if the average person is trying to get, let's say, 30 grams of protein, and they're going to use it from eggs, they think eggs is a high protein source. It kind of is high relative to some other foods, but it's not a great protein source as far as being high, because you need to have 5 to 6 eggs to get enough protein. So most people can't stomach 5 to 6 eggs. So then we think, okay, well, I don't want to have that many eggs to get my protein source, protein in the morning. So something like eggs is good to team up with something like egg whites or a protein shake, which would be a protein anchor. It anchors the number higher. Lean ground beef is one that I think is really important for people to recognize. Has a lot of fat in it. Even though it's called lean ground beef, even if you see it in the store, it'll say 90-10. That's not 90% protein. That's the butcher's number. not the macro number. The macro number is like 40% protein, 35 to 40% protein. And so you actually can't add much to that other than just adding more, probably vegetables. You want to add something that's low density, which would be vegetables or maybe a salad or something like that. You just don't want to add a lot of carbs to that meal because it's already so fat dense. And so then you have something like strip loin is another one. New York strip is what it basically is, the one side of the T-bone. And strip loin can vary. It can actually be closer to 50%, but then you'll notice on the strip loin where it's like a bit of gristle and then right at the bottom, a ton of gristle. So on average, you can assume it's probably around 40% protein. Some other things I thought about was like chicken drumsticks or thighs. If you have the skin on, it'll be a 50%, or sorry, it'll be 40%. If you have the skin off, it goes to neutral. So that makes a big difference. And salmon also varies a lot. I read up on this recently, and if you have salmon and it's somewhere's, if it has skin on, and if it's a farm salmon, it actually might be fattier. Salmon's a tough one because there's a lot of different numbers you can get, but it can be anywhere from 40% protein all the way up to 60% protein. So I would go based on, whatever number you can get from the company that you purchase it from, but also possibly caution how many carbs you add to that meal, carbs or fats, depending on what you're mixing with. But that's the main thing about fat balanced proteins: your eggs, your ground beef, certain fattier cuts of beef, and chicken thighs or drumsticks. Like, you mostly just want to eat those vegetables because they have enough fat in them. Then when it comes to neutral proteins, again, I don't think neutral is the right term. I know it's not. I just haven't thought of a new one. But it's basically something that's around 40 to 65% protein. And you can add some additional carbs or fats to a meal with that, but you have to be cautious still with it because it's not as lean. So, for example, a chicken thigh obviously has more fat than chicken breast. That's why it's so tender. So we still have to be cautious how many carbs we add in comparison. I would still add some vegetables or whatever you micronutrients you want to have to it, but then you have a choice of just maybe a little bit more rice in comparison to, say, chicken thigh with skin on, or in comparison to lean ground beef that is just with all the fat in it. Salmon, as I mentioned, it might be a leaner cut of salmon, in which case you got more room for your calories to have some rice, and then extra lean ground beef. So if you get extra lean ground beef, which I think the butcher's number is 95.5, but extra lean can be closer to 45 or 50% protein, and you would have more room for your calories. Now, and then the last two to mention here, and there are others, these are just the ones that came to mind. Lean ground turkey and lean ground chicken are a little bit leaner, obviously, than beef. They're not dramatically leaner, but they are a fair bit leaner. It depends on where you get it from. It could be somewhere around 50% protein. It could be around 60% protein, depending on who makes it. And I just want to point out the reason why we're doing this is because using the percentage is because if you're in a calorie deficit trying to lose weight, the odds are you probably want to have, depends on the person, but you probably want to have at the end of the day, your total calories being about 30 to 40% protein, maybe even higher, maybe 30 to 50% protein. I like a high protein diet myself. So every type of protein should be a minimum of that number. Otherwise, it's making it harder for you to hit that number, and it wouldn't be a good protein source, right? So if I'm using something like, peanut butter or mixed nuts or hummus and chickpeas, like people use these and call them protein sources. That's bringing your protein average down, not up. So that's why we always talk about the protein percentage, to have a relative idea of where you're sitting. And that way you can make each meal so it's around the 30 to 40% protein, and it gives you that meal plan structure really easily. Then going into protein anchors, these are the things that are just mostly protein. That's what they are. So when you have protein, the classic, fitness one is chicken breast, obviously, right? We all think of chicken breast, and for a good reason. It's like, 80%, 90% protein when it's really lean, and after it's been cooked. Pork tenderloin, though, I'll tell you, pork tenderloin is quietly the best lean meat for affordability that people don't realize and they don't talk about. I don't know why they don't talk about it. It's not like a hidden secret. It's just people don't consider it. Maybe because it comes from a pig. I don't know. But pork tenderloin is about 80%, I think 75 to 80% protein. And so it's very comparable to chicken breast. So you can almost use it gram for gram. The weight actually will be different. I should correct that. The weight of every meat is going to be different, even if they're similar protein percentages. The makeup of that meat is just different. It might hold water differently, right? The other little thing, and I think it's just commonly unknown about pork tenderloin, is that pork tenderloin, you don't have to cook it till it's white if it's been flash frozen. This is a way to preserve the food from the butcher, and it goes right from being killed, and then it'll go right into flash frozen. Once it's been flash frozen, it gets rid of the chance of any bacteria developing in it that would be, harmful or unhealthy. And so you can cook it with a little pink in the middle, and it tastes way better. Otherwise, it would be terribly dry. It's a terrible meat when it's dry. And I remember my mom always cooked it thoroughly, and I always wanted like applesauce or something with it. Now I don't. I don't need it at all, and it cooks very nice and tender. And if you're interested in recipes, just take a look at my YouTube, as I got a whole food library on there. Tuna is a great lean meat. Only thing to caution about tuna, and I think all fish have somewhat of a concern, but especially deep sea fish, is mercury poisoning. So tuna, I think, is a good sub to have here and there. I wouldn't have it the rest of my life. And I think there is a certain dosage based on your body weight and size. If you're pregnant, you probably should, pregnant or breastfeeding, you probably shouldn't have it. So tuna is a good option. And I actually personally like it as a backup meal plan, because especially these flavored ones, I get the canned tuna regular, and then I get a flavored one because it has so much flavor. I can just put it into the canned one. And when I don't have something prepped, when I should have something prepped, I can just grab it. It's good to go. So I highly recommend you try canned tuna as like a backup meal plan to have on hand. White fish, tilapia, halibut, cod, sole, all really good, but I will caution, and I didn't know this until I started paying attention to the meat prices, that they're really expensive per gram of protein. It's not best bang for your buck. I would go to the pork tenderloin. You can get it like $3 or $4, $3 a pound, sometimes $2.50. Egg white is another powerful one. As I mentioned, when you have something like eggs and you want to actually protein anchor it, mixing it with the egg white is a great way to boost that protein number up. And then from there, protein powder, pretty obvious one. That's mostly protein, especially if you have a whey protein isolate. And if you have digestion issues, whey protein isolate should be better. And if it's still not good, try a hydrolyzed whey. Hydrolyzed whey is even more processed to really get rid of any of the issues that you might have from the milk. And if you're still getting issues, then it might be a consideration to do a plant-based one, or if that's just your preference to have plant-based one, just make sure that you have some essential amino acids that you're teamed up with it, so that you get the right amount and it actually is going to be useful. There's other protein anchors. There's other lean sources of protein. For example, Greek yogurt, you get 0%. You got the skyr yogurt, the Icelandic yogurt. These things are all very lean, but what's interesting with Greek yogurt is you can have varying degrees. You can actually have Greek yogurt be a protein anchor, a neutral protein, or a fat-based one, depending on the protein percentage, which is kind of good. And what's really interesting is the research on fat, like dairy fat, is like normally there's some research that comes out that saturated fat isn't good, but for some reason the research comes out better with dairy fat, whole fat, when it's in the dairy form rather than saturated fat in some other forms. I've seen some compelling stuff on this, that it's just interesting when you have certain compounds in their whole form, it's healthier for you than you would realize. Just a side tangent. So one of the things that ends up being cool when you understand this is how to balance out your protein number, your protein percentage. And if you have a fat balanced protein, but you want to have more carbs, you put a protein anchor with it. Let's say you have a fatty meat, something that's just a fatty meat. It's more of a fat anchor. It would be bacon, pork ribs. I'm just not thinking of other ones. Sausages. These things are just mostly fat. And so if you want to have them, and you're trying to have it for breakfast, for example, have eggs with that. Sure, that's the balance. You have I hate this thing. I'm not sure who wants these. Please get rid of these things. So you have the eggs, which are going to be balanced, and then you have the sausage, just going to bring your percentage down. Brings your protein number up slightly, but you have more fat now, right? So that's where something like egg white comes in handy, or a protein shake comes in handy. Interestingly enough, when we talk about breakfast foods, is ham. Like if you get certain cuts of ham, it's actually relatively lean. And so when you're going out for breakfast and they're offering ham, that's a great way to get your protein number up. And it's a nice breakfast food that you can enjoy. So that's a way that you can team up the fat balanced anchors, or the fat balanced proteins, with the protein anchors. And it just helps you mix and match. As I mentioned, pork ribs, they're very fatty. I used to have chicken and ribs together because the chicken breast is so lean. You have it with the ribs and it makes it a more balanced meal. So that's a great way to start to appreciate the whole different setup and systems of the fat balanced proteins, neutral protein, protein anchors, and don't miss that certain things are going to be just energy sources, which would be carbs or fats. Those are energy sources that have protein in them. That doesn't make them a protein source. If it doesn't have a minimum of at least 35 or say 30 to 40% protein, it's an energy source that has protein in it, right? And rather, like, I wouldn't say that chicken breast is a good energy source because it has some energy, it has some fats, but it's not a good energy source. It just happens to have some in it, right? So this is where I wanted to leave off with the 10 times rule. This is the easiest way for you to ever look at a food item. Is this a good protein bar? Isn't it a good protein bar? Is it a good source of protein or not? Is the 10 times rule. The 10 times rule is pretty simple. Go to the nutritional facts. You look at nutritional facts and go, okay, how many grams of protein is it? You times the gram of protein by 10, and then that number should equal the total calories or be more than the total calories. So for example, with eggs, you have 6 grams of protein for, the total calories that are 70. Now it's pretty close. Here's the interesting thing, is it's close to. You know for sure it's 40% if it matches. So with one egg being 6 grams of protein, times it by 10, it's 60. So it's close to the 70, and it is 36%. So okay, we have a decent source of protein there. That's a really good sign. Now, something like lean ground beef, typically around 40%, you'll see, okay, I weigh out my protein and it says it's 16 grams of protein for the serving of 160 calories. That's 16 times 10, 160. Hey, I got a good source of protein. Typically in protein bars, this is a great way to check it. Quest bar, 20 grams of protein, 200 calories. And then if it's under that, like dramatically under that, or it can be close, but if it's really under that, then again, we don't have a good protein source. If it's higher than that, it's getting closer. Anything above that's going to be a neutral protein or protein anchor, right? Because if you have, say, something that's 20 grams of protein and it's 150 calories, that's a fair bit, that's good protein. It's probably closer to a neutral, probably around 50 or 60% protein. So it's a really quick way, checking the nutritional ingredients, take a look at the number, times it by 10, compare it to the calories, and you know you're on the right track. And it's a way you can do it quickly on the go. The main thing here is I just wanted to kick this Q&A live off with, what is your protein source? That's what I think, even before you track calories. You can start with calories if you want, but if you bring up the protein number first, before you even worry about tracking the calories, you'll naturally start eating less. And it's the structure for everything. There's a reason why we're the meat and potatoes, why the meat is the main course. It's not just our culture, it's beneficial for the meat to be in the main course. And it's super beneficial for your health to anchor these meal feedings with protein because they're gonna leave you full. Thank you very much, Sam. Appreciate you joining. And so start off with figuring out your protein sources. Then later on, now you know if you have fat balance or not fat balance, then you can even make your next decision. What can I add to it? Because if you don't know if you have a fat balanced protein, like a lean ground beef or something like that, then you don't know if you can add rice to it, right? If it's gonna be beneficial to add rice to it, because if you add, a cup of white rice to lean ground beef, you might have like a 600 calorie or 700 calorie meal all of a sudden when you're trying to hit 450. And so instead of that rice, you probably should just add veggies. That's why it's such an important good step as well. But start off with that. Start off with figuring out your different protein sources. And I always say start with 6. Start with 2 different that you would want to have for supper, 2 different that you'd want to have for at least lunch, maybe lunch and supper, and then 2 different for maybe an evening snack or your whatever you do for an extra protein shake maybe. And then from there you have 8 sources. and then you can build everything else up from there. But make sure you're hitting near your body weight in grams of protein. It doesn't have to be exactly. A good way to think about it, one number I heard was using your height in centimeters. I hardly even know my height in centimeters, but it's your body weight or target body weight in grams of protein. Target body weight, I even think, is a hard number for some people to know, but that's why I even say it's like almost your body weight in grams of protein. I usually give people 0.8 at a minimum for the body weight in grams of protein. So if you're 200 calories or 200 pounds, then you probably be anywhere from 150 to 170 would be your minimum effective dose where you know you're getting most of the benefits. Some people benefit all the way to the 1 gram per pound. Some people don't. Some people don't even like meat that much. Some people, like myself, I'll eat 250 grams a day sometimes because it has more satiety for me. Some people it doesn't. And just on the side note, because I'm going in the tangent anyways, extra protein just gets stored as muscle glycogen. It is not a negative. The only downside of having too much protein would be if you have any kidney issues. You have any pre-existing kidney issues, don't get your information from someone on Instagram. Get it from a doctor and a dietitian. But if you have no pre-existing kidney issues, extra protein might just help with more satiety, and it might be a food preference thing. I know some people who don't need that much. They're trying to gain weight and they just want to eat more of it. I'm not going to stop that. So if you want to eat more of it, and if someone actually didn't want to eat that and they actually had a hard time eating it, it's actually making me uncomfortably full, I'd rather eat more carbs, then that would be a choice that you'd want to eat more carbs instead of more protein. And then especially if someone's trying to gain weight, protein's the higher satiety food. If you're trying to gain weight and then you end up trying to eat all this protein, it's like, oh man, I'm gaining weight, I gotta eat more protein. It's like, no, that number is even less impactful. If anything, I think the 1 gram per protein, 1 gram per body weight, 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight is more so for people trying to lose weight because it's so effective for satiety. So rough there is, don't worry about it. If you have more than enough, it's a good thing. And I'll leave it at that. I just want to go over the fundamentals of how to balance it all out. I'm going to figure out, I want to be able to do a whiteboard, but I guess this is in reverse, and I'm not sure how I can do a whiteboard without this. I could have flipped this, eh? Could have done this. Yeah, I didn't think of that. Next time I'll have a whiteboard and I'll be able to draw things out. Thanks for joining, and catch you in the next Q&A in a couple weeks.